Okay, so good morning and welcome back to all of you. As you can see, I'm still alive and so happy to be back. I've been working a lot at first, a little slowly, but now really well. This is I think it's very interesting um, lecture on pre-Columbian art in Mesoamerica. So make sure that you don't unmute yourself now because I've muted you and we don't want to be distracted by your local noises. So before I start with Central America, I want to talk about the whole idea of migration. So as you know, we have the theory has been for a long time that about 20,000 years ago, there was a big migration from the Detroit of the Strait of Bering when the level of the sea got down and so enabled people to move across. And so you can see on the left, one of these animated map that shows you that evolution of the Strait of Bering and the fact that it allowed people from East Asia, Northeast Asia to come across. Prior to the arrival of that big migration, we have other, because I think we still have some problem. Somebody hasn't muted. No, please make sure you muted. Okay, I'm going to mute you all again. So we have proof of many migration, but we're not human migration because we find the similar dinosaur fossils in Asia and North America. We also have an exchange of primates between North America and Asia about 55 million years ago. By 20 million years ago, we see another exchange of mammalian species. As you must have heard, they were the saber-toothed cats in both places, as well as in Europe, in Africa. And we assume definitely that they went through the Detroit of Bering. The human migration, as I say, started probably 20,000 years ago. But what happened is when the Strait of Bering became firm territory, if you want, there was a push from Asia on the Strait of Bering, and population stayed on that piece of land for about 5,000 years. And when the ice started melting, then part of people went back, as you can see with the A here, went back to Asia, but the others moved to America. And so that was the first big one. Now, there's not only that theory, but there are a few findings that happened about 20 years ago, where archaeologists found in two places, one in North America and one in actually South America, found some artifacts as well as some remains of people that would have moved prior to the migration from the Strait of Bering. And so you can see here what is considered the Parsley Cave, 14,300 years ago, would predate what happened with the Strait of Bering. So what they call the pre-Clovis side. The Clovis is a certain type of arrowheads, points that are of a specific shape and that are very typical all over the North America of population that moved at that time. So between the Huaca Prieta in Peru and the Monteverde in Chile, as well as the Paisley Cave in the United States, we know that some people migrated to the Americas prior to the migration through the Detroit of Bering. And this was probably done by boat. There were lots of fishermen, and they probably came. And at that time, there were a lot of islands that existed that are now underwater because the water level raised. And what you see here in low gray, light gray, are islands that are now not visible, can be even 300 feet below the water level, where would be some signs of what really happened. So we have two sorts of migration, and a lot of things is still, we still have to know it. Now, also one point that I want to insist on is for the Native American, most of them don't recognize that these two migrations, because they consider they were always there, and that's all part of their mythology, the fact that their idea of the creation, they were the owner of the land, and they never came from anywhere, they were there. So this is a little point that needs to be emphasized. So beside that very brief introduction to the migration, I want to say that I was very glad to realize that now both Mesoamerica and South America are recognized as one of the two of the ancient civilizations that were born not by influence, but just born by themselves. The cradles of civilization, as they called, are few. You have the ones here in Mesopotamia and Egypt. You have the Indus and Ganges Valley, and you have China. And then now in Mesoamerica, you have the Olmecs there and the Norte Chicos in Peru. This is really interesting because we come to the whole idea of civilization. What makes a civilization? Be able to start, if you want, a civilization, you need people to be settled. You need people to produce enough agricultural products and others to have surplus. In having surplus, they can now live better, and they can trade with other populations by bringing in products that they don't have in their in the ground or whatever, and that they can do things with. This is, the population is going to grow. You come to now have a stratified society, and the elite is going to start ordering buildings of monuments that would not have been built before. And so we come everywhere with different monuments, as of course the pyramids in Egypt, the Sakura in Mesopotamia. In India, you have lots of buildings of cities, very advanced with drainage system and water flowing in. Also a big amount of writing in China, similar things. And of course, in Mesoamerica, with the Olmecs that we will see in a minute, we also have pyramids and other important sculptures. In Norte Chico, we'll see that next month. We have different kind of monuments and buildings. So here you can have an idea of how these start, the oldest being Mesopotamia in the Middle East. So you have Sumer with the succession of different culture, Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, and Persian later on. Then Gizeh in Egypt. Then you have the early, intermediate, middle, and new kingdoms in the late kingdoms until the invasion by Alexander. Indus Valley civilization followed by the Vedic period. In China, the early two, the Shang, the Shu, the Qin, and the Han. And then in the Andes, you have Norte Chico, and then different formative, the Chavan and the intermediate period. In Mesoamerica, we start the first civilization is the Olmec, we'll see. And beside the Maya, we have others that we will investigate too. This is a chronology of the Mesoamerican culture. And you can see that beside, of course, all kind of other little location, small towns that produce some very pretty objects that we can see, but that cannot be defined as civilization. The first civilization that we see in Mesoamerica are the Olmecs. Well, I'm probably going to be imbalanced in the way I present today because so little was known of the Olmecs that I want to emphasize all the things that were the first to do, because it's going to have an impact on the cultures that follow. Just a little later than the Olmecs, we have the Monte Alban around Oaxaca. And then about the same time, we have Teotihuacan next to Mexico City. That is that very international culture. Monte Alban is going to have multiple phases, and the Olmecs are going to die out about 200 CE, as we say, or AD, the old-fashioned way of saying, about at the time of the development of the Mayas. We also have the Toltec empire that is very, very interesting too. Prior to that, I'm trying to see, with the Monte Alban is, we have there, and then of course we'll have the Aztec towards the end. Cholula, very briefly, we'll look at it too, but and then the Aztec, who start shortly before the Spanish invasion. When the Spaniards arrived, this is about the way Mesoamerica was split, if you want. So in darker brown, you have the Aztec Empire with a little piece there. But as you can see, there are a whole series of territories that are their own empires or kingdoms. In middle green, you have the kingdom of Coliman. Of Colimad, you have the Tarasco Empire. These are territories that are, if you want, relating to the Aztecs. And then, of course, we have the different territories. By that time, the Mayas have moved on, have emigrated, and the peninsula of Yucatan is about finished, though they will defend themselves against the Spaniards. But as you can see, it's a very intricate society. I want to talk about the alias of archaeology, what archaeologists are finding themselves fighting every day against. And one is a very important one, and very important aspect is the intellectual property rights that are now fought against very, very much by the Mexicans. As most of the big discoveries have been done by American archaeologists from Yale, from Harvard, and from different places. Some Mexicans did too, but nothing to be compared with the Americans. The Mexicans are really revolting against the fact that America is taking all the credit. And so there's a big fight going on. And so that's why you don't have too many works that are issued recently on archaeology. Even if they are discoveries, they are fighting now to be able to write something about it. They can show pictures, but they have to always give credit to Mexico. So this is a main problem. Also the fact, for example, if American archaeologists need to have special authorization to go to Mexico to revisit a site or use some of the pictures, they have to go literally through Washington to be able to get in touch with the Mexicans. Now, the archaeological sites themselves are a real challenge, often because of climatic conditions, difficulty of access, as you can imagine. That was the case and still is the case in the peninsula of Yucatan. It's overgrown, it's full of mosquitoes, the trails are extremely difficult. If they exist, most of the time you have trees that have fallen across. So that's very difficult. These are difficult conditions for archaeologists to go through. The landscape was literally changed by the Mayans, because what we see now is that tropical forest in Yucatan did not exist anymore during the Mayas' ruling. The Mayans were made of city-states, and they literally completely cut down all the trees that were around their cities. This having had a great impact on nature and actually caused their demise. What is interesting is because of the soil in Yucatan, for example, which is mostly lime, this has had an impact on the coloring of the trees. So when seen from the satellite, for example, they have just recently discovered that the coloring of the trees is going to actually give you an idea where are some of the old cities, and there's still many that have not even been discovered. What they can say too is that, for example, low canopy trees are growing now where were lakes before. The high canopies where the cities were. One of the main problem, of course, of archaeologists is, like almost everywhere, but because of the lack of supervision and the vastness of the territory that is still to be excavated, looting is a major problem. Literally, they are known to be looters going into the tropical forest, and when they find a new pyramid with glyphs, with these signs that are engraved, if you want, and sculpted on pyramids, they go with these big logging saws, and the two of them, and they just go and cut down a whole slab of these pyramids so that they can have the glyphs and sell them to privateers. And as soon as you do a thing like this, even if it's recovered one day, you don't have any provenance, nor it has never been included in any documentation. So you have that incredible loss of context. And this is literally a fight of archaeologists who, when they discover something, as they have to go back home, are trying sometimes to just bury it so that it won't be taken by looters. This is not the only problem too, but what happens is that in some very important site, and we'll see one with the Olmecs, there are some industries, mostly oil, petroleum industries, that have found some interesting places for them. And lo and behold, don't care about the archaeology, even if it's a most important place. They're going to settle there and demolish everything to be able to install their wells, as well as the whole infrastructure that goes around. Also, cities expansion. This is the case in Teotihuacan, where the city around it is growing very rapidly, and they start building on the edge of sites that have not been yet excavated, and really are endangering a lot of places where some important artifacts or murals or whatever could be discovered. So a real problem for archaeologists. Now, Mesoamerican culture is characterized by a very diverse geography. The geography often dictates the kind of agriculture they can, of course, establish. And because of the diversity, when you have high plateaus or you have the Sierras, but you have also low valleys and deltas and so on, they're going to be able to plant some crops. But for the population to survive, they often need more than one crop. And so this is going to cause an interdependency between these different cities and groups that will have to exchange their crops so that they can survive. These crops, of course, maize, corn. Corn is really going to be the most important in Mesoamerica as it is still now. And particularly when it's been worked, and I'm not going to go through the whole way of doing it, but when they grind the maize into cornbread and so on, there is a whole chemical process that happens and makes what is the end result, the masa, with which you make tortillas and so on, much more nourishing, much more complete, a much more complete ingredient that is going to be richer to ingest. Beans, squash, chili peppers are some of the most important ingredients that the indigenous population used to eat. There were also some prestige crops like cotton, cocoa, and vanilla. Cocoa was, of course, you make chocolate out of cocoa. And this was very important, but was only served to the rulers. So this was a very important nut, if you want. That was, of course, then became one of the favorite of the Europeans. But cotton, cocoa, and vanilla are really prestigious things. As far as fauna is concerned, it used to be, the country used to be run by very large games, mammoths, woolly mammoths, and many others. But the overhunting extinguished these breeds. So what is left as large game are the jaguar, the caiman, the javelinas, the ocellated turkey, and the deers. Unfortunately for the population, the turkey, that kind of turkey cannot be domesticated. And so they typically would put them in certain enclosed areas so that they could feed them and eat them later, but make them a little heavier. Same thing with the deers. The only domesticated animal that were found were actually dogs, ducks, and in some places, some pigs. Dogs were used for food, sorry, ladies, but also for help as hunters. Now, as far as the materials for luxury artifacts, they came from distant location, which means, again, we are again entering the idea of trading. And if you have new civilization with surplus of food, they would send that and then get in return obsidian, for example, which was used for all kind of tools, a very sturdy stone. The Mesoamerican were very rarely using metal, but obsidian was about everything they used as far as weapons. Jade was used to make absolutely delightful object, as you will see. Jade was coming all the way from the southern part of Mexico at the border with Guatemala. The tools were made of jade that were used to create these beautiful objects in jade, as well as jade powder as abrasive. Now, the Mesoamerican didn't need the wheel. The wheel was known, but was only used in miniature. And what was the reason? They had no draft animal. They had no bulls or cow. Uh, they had no horse. The horse, there was a kind of horse prior to the really the explosion of the civilization, but they were extinct because, again, part of the overhunting. So not having any draft animals, the wheel wasn't necessary because there was nothing to pull the carts. Mesoamerica has calendars, a very intricate system of calendars that we will see, and also writing. And also, might surprise you, but it's one of the earliest known instances of the explicit zero in human history, and that was part of the whole idea of the calendars. So before we go into the Olmecs, I want to insist, as I had mentioned before, that there are some civilization that no, not civilization. There were some little pockets of culture in Mesoamerica that produced some delightful objects. And I'm just showing you one, and it's Tlatilco, which is very close to Mexico City, the southern part of what used to be the Lake Texcoco. And there were finds, incredible finds there in tombs. You can see a reproduction of the tomb on the right. That dates back to between 1300 and 800 BCE. And these remains were surrounded by a very elegant pottery, but also extraordinary figures. And I only show you two, the acrobat on the right, the middle, and then on the left, the Tlatilco figure, two-faced figure with three eyes. And there are many figures with two heads, or there are figures that just show regular women or men going around, but they are absolutely delightful. Surprising are the vessels that you see at the bottom of the image, the stirrup vessel from Tlatilco, because this is a kind of vessel you find in Peru with the early civilization in Peru. So there have been a lot of deduction trying to understand how did it go to both places. It seems to be very far for them to have traveled from one point to the other. So one of the theories is that there was a point in between that produced these. And then they were seen by people around Tlatilco. And it could be at the very top, the very northern part of South America, in Venezuela or other places. And then it was seen by the population in Peru that produced them quite a lot. We will see a lot of these. That's why I brought these up. So Tlatilco is just an example of some of these little pockets of cultures that existed at that time, but were not powerful enough to really be qualified of civilization. So the first civilization we find in Mexico is the Olmecs. And the Olmecs date back from 1500 to 300 before a common era. It is considered the mother culture. The name comes from later, it was qualified from later cultures, and it was actually supposed to mean the rubber people. It's indeed, they are known to use rubber for different purposes, including bowls that are going to be central to the famous bowl games that are paramount in that whole region. The Olmecs are part of what you call the formative period. So this is prior to what was considered prior to the discoveries in that part of Mexico of a pre-classical period, which is considered to be the Mayas. So you have the initial formative period between 2000 and 1400, the early formative period, 1400 to 900, the middle formative period between 900 and 400, and then the late formative period, 400 to 200. And it is located here. I'm also showing you this place Monte Alto, because we will see that there is some sculptures that are not the same, but show also that kind of efflorescence of culture south in what is now Guatemala. The main location of the Olmec heartland is in that delta that you have here of the river, just it's west of the Yucatan, just north of the Mayas. And the main sites are the San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan that we're going to see, La Venta, and the Tres Zapotes. Here they are again. So the first one is the San Lorenzo that we will look at, but also look at that site of El Manati, which was a little further away, was a hill, where there were some findings that were extremely interesting. The whole area, unfortunately, has a very acidic soil, and it has been very difficult to have, for example, any remains, human remains that were found because they were eaten by that acidity. But you can see in El Manati, which was a little higher up, some pieces that were moved, taken there because it was a cult center. So San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan is here, not to be confused with Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, and La Venta here, and then the Tres Zapotes over there, which is still in the middle of excavation. So what is of Olmec origin? What makes the Olmec so interesting? The rubber balls and the ball cord. This is where it starts, and it's found everywhere. Any big center in Mesoamerica has multiple ball cords. Pyramid building. This is where we find the first pyramids. Also, the way they build their cities with a bilateral symmetrical plan. In the Olmecs were absolutely beautiful craftsmen in jade working. They were making mirrors with certain stone that they could polish so well that they could see their image. And then we started seeing there an interest in human portraiture. Also, but unfortunately not yet deciphered, the first one where we find logographs and phonetic signs. So logographs being images, these are glyphs, if you can call them. So images that mean either a word or a name, but some of the signs were also considered as syllables, so sounds. I'm not going to go too much into the whole writing because it's extremely intricate, and there are many books that you can find that are going to be much better than I am. So, unknown color. So the interesting thing is close to El Manati, we found some in the soil that was not acid as we find in other places. We found a whole series of wooden busts. These busts that date back to about 1200 BCE. And when you think of that date, 1200 BCE, so that you have an idea across the world, think that it's just a little later than the War of Troy in Greece. So that's about the equivalency. So these busts were about 37 of them, were well preserved because of the condition they were found in, which was anaerobic condition, so there was no air that could damage them. And the temperature of the water was stable, so it prevented the microbial decay. They dated it back with carbon 14 to about, as I said, 1200 BCE. They seem to have been ritually buried and wrapped in mats made of vegetable fibers. And so this is one of the first examples too of funeral wrapping. And so these probably were accompanying some remains. And as you can see, each of the face is different. So there is definitely an interest for each of them. They were also accompanied with wooden staffs or some cells that we're going to see later, some bundles of leaves and plants, a hematite bowl, a whole series of different artifacts that were accompanying them. El Manati was considered a sacred place, and because there was a natural spring. So often when you had these types of burials, they would also cover many of these objects with red hematite. Now, for the little story for gossips, some of these heads were stolen in 1980 and were later found in Germany in the hands of some archaeological object traffickers. And they ended up in the Bavarian State Archaeological Collection. In 2018, some of them were repatriated to Mexico. And this is unfortunately the story of many of these objects. Among the beautiful objects in jade are celts, and these are ceremonial celts. They're these type of objects that could be used as kind of a hatchet if you want. But these, that's so beautiful, as you can see, either it's with a footprint sculpted in it or an engraving in the one on the right. They were also discovered at El Manati. And again, for the same reason, this was a cult center. And so some of the most beautiful objects that were made in San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan ended up in that place. So many of these celts were made of jadeite, greenstone, schist, green quartz. And this is some of the objects that accelerated, if you want, the exchange of technology between these different cultures. These must have been used for important ritual ceremonies. And they were associated with ears of corns and also the husk of the corn. One of the most interesting of these cells is the Kunst axe, Kunst for the person who discovered it, and was found away from there, but they know it was Olmec, but it was found in the hills of Oaxaca quite early in 1890. This is a votive axe that is one of the first artifacts to be identified with the Olmec civilization. As you can see, the end comes with a net at the very bottom, but the upper part is quite interesting because it has a head that looks like a human head, but then the whole mouth and so on is definitely influenced by the head of the jaguar. And this is something that we find is that kind of mixture of human and animal features in many of their work. As you can see, the hand is pretty nicely shown here. This is not a claw, but it's a hand. But if you compare that image of the jaguar next to it, you can see immediately the same features of the mouth and then the cleft here around the forehead. This is a figure that is definitely 2 or 3 dimensional. And as we know, again, these would have been only used for particular cults. So here's the part of the site of San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan. Why a similar name to what is now Mexico, and that used to be the capital of the Aztec, is because these names were given by the colonial missionaries that came, and so they started giving names here and there. So San Lorenzo is definitely a Catholic name of St. Lawrence. And the Tenochtitlan, they didn't care that there was another Tenochtitlan. They might not even know of it. This very particular building that you can see there, it was the house of one of the rulers. It's considered the Red House because they found that at many places the soil had been covered with red hematite. But it's a very interesting building. There are some columns in many places. And then they found, as you can see there on the right, a whole system of drainage where the water would be taken by these type of little canals all the way within the house. And at the place where the water would come down into that location, there would be a sculpture that would allow the water to flow through it, and then end up in these little canals made of clay. So this is considered to be the first true Mesoamerican city. It was a very important center of commerce, religion, and political power during its time. Some of the most impressive sculptures that have been found there are the famous very large faces. And I show you 2 images that give you an idea how these colossal heads were found. So the one on the left shows that it was actually standing, and they must have found the top of the head and then dug around it. This was discovered in 1862. The one on the right was discovered in 1994. To give you an idea, this is the head number 10, by the way, on the right. Discovered in a ravine, as you can see, with some standing water around it. These heads weigh between 8 and 25 tons. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, 2 of the heads, the head number 1 and the head number 7. As you can see, they have these very personal features. There've been a lot of theories about the fact that they have African features, though that has been discounted because they compare with the population that still live in the area that seem to have a larger nose with a large bridge, as well as fleshy mouths. These date back from 1200 to 900 BCE, measured 9 feet 6 in height. So you have an idea, it's absolutely incredible. They are right now in the Jalapa Museum of Anthropology in Veracruz. And these heads are believed to be the portrait of the rulers. Now, what is really interesting is that, as you can see on the head on the right, there's a special type of engravings, if you want, in the stone. And it is believed to have been, previous to being a head, to have been a throne on which the ruler would sit. And we'll see some examples further down. And the belief is now that when a ruler had his throne, when he died, they would make a head of his throne, and you had that kind of transfer of the spirit of the ruler, literally from his seat of power to the head believed to be the center of the power for a human being. So 10 of these heads, as I say, were discovered just in San Lorenzo. What we have to understand too is that the basalt that the heads are made of was coming from about 80 miles away. So imagine that not only did they have to carve these heads, but they had to transport them all the way to San Lorenzo to be displayed. And so it's believed that it was through the river they would bring from the quarry and the workshop where it was sculpted to the river and then transported on raft all the way to a closer place to San Lorenzo, and then again transported from there on tree trunks, rolling across, the same way as it's believed to have been the case in the big, the large stone structures in England as well as in France. So it gives you already an idea too of the power of these rulers, that they could commission people to do such things. Other type of sculptures is like this warrior, a very interesting sculpture, also made of basalt. It's from the early formative period, also so between 1200 and 600. It must have had within the holes that show the arms, they had some perishable and movable arms, so that would jut from there and then were discarded with the time. But it's really admirable to see the way the costume is very carefully described. And then what you see here hanging around his neck, what was a mirror. And so rulers would have that mirror that would be an incredible sign of power, because it would reflect the light around them and be quite impressive to the population. That statue was also found buried ritualistically. The wrestler is another of these incredible works. You can see really the action around there. What is interesting is when it was discovered, it was used to prop up a chicken coop. Unfortunately, some archaeologists were able to remove it and study and display it. It's in Mexico, in the Museum of Anthropology, National Museum of Anthropology. Once San Lorenzo declined, another center in that region started flourishing, and we're talking about La Venta. He is the aerial photography of the Great Pyramid that is shown there. Pyramid, as you can see, that is covered with soil as well as plants of all kind. It comes a little later. This is the period of La Venta between 900 and 400 BCE. It was a civic and ceremonial center, and that's what we find now almost everywhere in Mesoamerica, is where you have the pyramid. There were also other buildings around, and these were the places where people would come and worship their gods and the ruler, who very quickly became the object of their cult. Now, what is interesting, and why wasn't it the gap, is with La Venta comes the problem with industry. A good part of the site and I'm going to show you the next image here, a good part of the site, and it is mostly this part down here, is going to be occupied by a petroleum company who is going to care about nothing about archaeology. They're going to install their wells and all the buildings around, they're going to decapitate the pyramid to put a windsock on top, and then around the pyramids were buildings that were dedicated to the amusement of the male crew, and I don't have to define what it is. Unfortunately, this is what happened. So a whole part of La Venta has been ruined because when they installed all their technology and so on, they didn't care a bit about what was found in the ground. But this was saved. So here you have an idea where the colossal heads were. There was a tomb that was discovered here. The complex is the pyramid, and then there was a large acropolis and different complexes, different houses that were dedicated to different rulers. Also were found 4 different heads, as you can see, just kind of similar to the ones found in San Lorenzo. They are about the same height, 9.4 feet. The pyramid was one of the earliest pyramids known in America, and it contained an estimated 100,000 cubic meters of earth fill. Many interesting objects and construction were found in La Venta. This is one of the 3 mosaics of pavement from La Venta made of serpentine. It's constituted of 500 blocks of serpentine. But these were not visible. These were buried ritually, which means, again, they were covered with precious soil like hematite. And then disappeared from the eyes of people. This is about 15 feet by 20 feet. And as I say, was not intended for display. They were covered with colored clay and then many feet of earth. So there are 3 of them that have been discovered in La Venta. And that looks almost like a design of, tassel at the bottom, almost like a piece of clothing. As I mentioned, they were what at first was believed to be altars. And now we know that these were not altars, but were thrones. This is where the ruler would sit. And always accompanying these thrones are engravings. You can see some eyes and mouths there at the top. That could be the jaguar who was so venerated. But also different figures. This is one example of a figure that is sitting and slouching forward with a rope that is surrounding the base of the throne. And so it is this type of throne that would be then reused after the death of the ruler to make a head of his resemblance. Some different monuments. This one is the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, that will become the Quetzalcoatl in the Aztec mythology, but the feathered serpent who is, everywhere in Mesoamerica. This is the very first representation that has been found there. And definitely it shows that connection between the animals and the spirituality among the Olmecs. As you can see, very elaborate headdress, which is also, again, something we'll find everywhere in Mesoamerica. Interesting things too are, for example, what is called the offering for, that was found in that disposition when it was found. So in a very particular pattern where you have figures in semicircle, you have 4 figures in line like a procession, a female figure, and then you have some of the celts that are put around almost like a background, and then you have across from them an opposing figure. Very interesting is El Señor de las Limas. Uh, Again, a figure made of green stone, and you have the figure that is sitting with crossed legs and holding in his arms a baby with the head of a jaguar. Not only is the whole image extremely interesting, was so different that when it was discovered by somebody accidentally. It was believed to be a religious image, and it was set in a church as La Virgen de las Limas. And, only when an archaeologist came and then saw that was much older than the Catholic figure, was able to bargain to take it with the promise that they would reconstruct the church and help in different ways. It was then the Museum of Anthropology in Veracruz. Another story there too is 5 years later in 1970, the statue was stolen from the museum and was found in a motel room in San Antonio, Texas. It was going to be sold on the black market, but was then restored to the museum. What is very interesting is it is engraved, and you have on both knees and on both arms a particular image, and these are believed to be the image of gods. So the figure on the right shoulder is identified as the banded eye god, with the narrow band that goes across his eye. The figure from the right leg is considered as the Olmec dragon, with an X covering his eye. The figure from the left shoulder is the bird monster, and then from the left leg, the fish or shark monster. So these are pretty much a beginning of glyphs, if you want, but they have a particular meaning for a certain god. Now, very different to what we've seen anywhere else. There are many of these figures of babies. And they call them howling babies. They come in big numbers, and you find them all around, putting their fingers in their mouths and a kind of a little pot belly, and a type of a helmet on the head. The human gestation cycle was considered as something very important, and was linked to the natural and cosmic cycles. And we're going to see that it has a great importance in one of the calendars that they established. So very often you find images of these babies or some fetuses widespread among the imagery of humans. Also, superb masks. They've been found in different places, some in jadeite or greenstone, very expressive. Some seem so Asian. The one on the oldest one on the left here looks very much like a Japanese mask. And then you have that second one from the formative period, and the last one from 600, but as you can see, extremely handsome mask. Some of them, by the way, were found literally in Tenochtitlan with the Aztec, at the Aztec period, because they were worshipped by the Aztecs, the Olmecs being the ancestors of all. and their particularly great craftsmanship was very much recognized by many of the cultures that followed. Now, writing is definitely there. When it starts, nobody has deciphered the Olmec writing. This is one example that dates back to 650 BCE. This is a cylinder, and this is in fact the cylinder rolled on a surface where you see the rollout of that cylinder, showing the bird speaking the name of three Ajau. Ajau was king, was the ruler. But so this would be Ajau, and this would be three. And this is believed to be really the beginning of writing. Also can be found in that Cascaral block that was found also accidentally. Very difficult to see on the block itself, but you can see all kinds of scripts there that have been designed here on the side. 62 glyphs of that time. The piece itself was found by villagers among a series of scrap blocks that were put on the side when they were starting to build a road. And then it was called to the attention of Richard Deal, and Michael Coe, these being some of the pioneers of research in archaeology of Mesoamerica. You can see them up there. So really interesting glyphs. Again, it hasn't been deciphered. It has all the hallmarks of written language, including syntax pattern, word order, and repetition. There are some words that are repeated 3 times. Other beautiful object also covered by glyphs. The glyphs are dating from later than the time where that little statuette was made. It's called the Isthmian script. The Isthmian script is very early Mesoamerican writing system that was used between 500 BCE and 500 CE. Again, has not been deciphered. Here is an idea, because it's difficult to see on that green leather, but the reproduction of the different glyphs that were found on that statuette. The Olmecs established a calendric system. 3 different kind of calendars, and again, I'm not going to go deep into it. We have 260-day calendar. The first example of that calendar has been found in the 6th century BCE in Oaxaca. Again, it was an Olmec calendar, but taken to Oaxaca. Please try to mute. I'm going to stop right now because we have to stop this noise. It's difficult. So please bring the participant back in the room.
I think Carol Phillips is making noises.
Yeah, Carol, do you have some noise in your place? Because
yeah, I thought I had that muted.
Okay, no, it was. So you can unmute yourself. We're going to take 5 to 7 minutes of break. Please get yourself a cup of coffee or water, and ask me a question. Up to now, we almost done with the Olmec. So,
can you hear me?
Carol, I think if you unless you have some question, if you could mute your computer.
Okay, I thought it was muted.
No, now you are. Now you are muted because it was interfering with my voice. Okay. Any questions on all what we've seen now? John,
I have a question about the axe.
yes,
You said that those jade pieces could be used as axes.
they are kind of, you know, the little, they call cells, and they could be, you had the same thing is a useful tool. The one that I show you, they are mostly ceremonial, but they were type of axe or knife or whatever that they could be used for different purposes.
Also the thrones. I couldn't figure out where the ruler was sitting on those thrones.
Probably would sit on top of it, just,
Yes.
you know, and there might have been some things that degraded and are not extant anymore, but it could be made of wood or different things where he could sit on, or he might be just sitting on it as such. But these are pretty high and would have been recognized, you know, that was going hand in hand with the power of the ruler. And there are many of them, each with a different kind of figure under. They are either prisoners, sometimes it's with a baby. It's different iconography.
And
Yes, John.
the question I have is that at the very beginning, you made a distinction between culture and civilization.
Yes.
You, the Aztecs were a culture, the Toltecs were a civilization.
Civilization is, when you talk about the cradles of civilization, is suddenly you have that culture that takes such a dimension, it becomes a civilization. But it comes from spontaneously, so it doesn't depend on the contact with another big culture. So everything that follows the Olmecs are cultures that have derived a way or another from what the Olmecs did. And so they often talk about these cultures as their ancestors. All of them, if you want, derive from another one that was before them, not the Olmec, because there were no big cultures around at that time. So the Olmecs become that mother civilization.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and you see, the problem is, again, there's been so much looting or so much loss because of that stupid, I'm so angry about it.
No, but it was the map you showed with the original civilizations in the world. That was, I mean, worth a lot. I had never seen a map like that. It made a picture of, I mean, the history a little clearer. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, and you see, this is what, when you see Mesopotamia, there were other things that were around, but never that you know, came to a point where you had religion and an organization and administration that made it so powerful. And so, yes, there were things prior to that, but you can't call it a civilization. You have to have different elements, just as not especially writing, but hierarchy within the society and so on. In the South America, as we know, we don't have writing. The early population, the Chicos, didn't have a writing system. So that's about the only place where they didn't have it, but they had other things that make it important enough that they were one of the cradles of civilization.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other question?
Ian.
Yes.
Am I accidentally, this isn't related, am I accidentally recording us or are you recording us?
I'm recording you.
Oh, okay.
I'm recording this and it will be put on YouTube as soon as the school is able to do so.
Okay.
Because it's a long process. It takes a lot, you know, it's 2 hours of talk. It's a long process to do so. So as soon as they have time, because they staff constrained, they will do it, and then you have access to it on YouTube. Most of my talk of the last year and a half are on YouTube.
Okay.
Just-
that one, those several men standing in a circle.
Yeah,
And then was that a kind of sacrifice?
nobody
I
knows.
wondered.
That's why they gave it the name offering. So is it the portrayal of one of their ceremonies? We don't know.
And
We
they
don't-
were female figures, I think.
There was one.
One female figure.
It's difficult to know if they were female. They know their position, but I don't think they had marks on the little statuette that was defining the sex.
Okay.
You know, if I can make a
Idea. Yes, John.
now on the big heads you showed,
Yes.
what struck me was that how the big heads have characteristics of the Negro race.
And that's why some theories have come up, as you can imagine, where they were saying it's very negroid. So that means that the Africans came in contact with the Olmecs in 1200, or 1500 BCE. That has been, most archaeologists refuse the idea. And as I say, they went to the location, in La Venta and so on, and looked at the population that has been established there for a long time. And they found that they had features that were, as I say, a bigger nose and a more fleshy mouth than the rest of the population. So it was denied the idea that the Africans would have been in contact.
It seems to me that the art, the drawings that they do are just so unique and beautiful.
Yeah, you're going to see plenty more. It's really, that's where you can see that the Mayas have still look at the Olmecs. All the cultures around look at the Olmecs as their mother culture. Okay, we got to go on. Now we don't have any more noise. So I'm going to.
Yes, I have one quick question.
Yes, Andy.
A lot of the artifacts seem to have ended up in New York City in the Metropolitan Museum. Is there an effort to get them back into Central America?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question, because depending on the importance of it, but right now, anything that is found in Mesoamerica belongs to Mesoamerica. You're not allowed to take anything out of the country. What has been taken there, probably because it's most of the time it's through looters. Many things have already been sent back. If it's really minor, I don't know what the policy of Mexico is right now, but some of the pieces definitely are going to go back a day or another. Some other, if they really are produced in great quantity, if it's just an example, I doubt that they would go through a big, come to a big argument with other countries. But that's the whole huge problem of the looters. And it's a drama for the archaeologists, because suddenly they say, oh, that's Olmec. Okay, which site does it come from? Because the site is going to define the age. You can't date a celt by itself unless you know it's surrounded with things that are organic. Carbon-14 can only go on organic stuff.
Oh.
So that's the problem. Okay, we're gonna go on because I still have so much to show you guys. So go back to this, and then I'm going to mute you all, and we have time at the end. Sorry, I'm going to interfere with your lunch, but here is. So 3 calendric system. The 260-day calendar is a ritual calendar that is not correlated to astronomical or agricultural cycles. Now, when we talk about calendars, the necessity of calendars and the understanding of the cosmos was paramount for populations that were relying on agriculture. because they needed to know when they had to put the seeds in, when they needed to do the harvest, when they had to do this and that. And so they had to understand the world around them. And the calendars are often the result of these researches. It's also going to be very important for the rulers once they try to establish their legitimacy, where going back, as we'll see with the long count calendar, is going to be established their past and their ancestors, and so make themselves very legitimate. So 260-day calendars doesn't correspond to astronomical or agricultural cycles, and they are very culture specific. What is really interesting with the 260 days cycle, it's 20 different day names are paired with 13 day numbers, and you multiply the two and you come to 260 days. That cycle was used for divination purposes to foretell lucky or unlucky day. The date of birth was also used to give names to both humans and gods in that period. So we don't know the origin of that calendar. There are different theories. It could be that it is based also on the human pregnancy, which is about 260 days. Also, the different astronomical events, such as the sun passes through the zenith twice a year, and there are 260 days between zenithal passage. These are all the theories that are, unfortunately, there are no more Olmecs there to tell us how it works. The second big one is the 360-day calendar, which is approximates the tropical year. The only thing is, of course, we have 5 days that are missing after a while. As you know, the year is 364 and something. And so they form 5 unlucky days after a time. And these 5 unlucky days that were to be added, that were not part of the calendar, were time where apparently the Indians were doing nothing. And it was really, you couldn't start anything then because it would be unlucky. Also comes into the idea of the Ventenas, which go back, it's 20. Again, we go back to the idea of 20 and 13. The 20 units went on part of that calendar all the way to now. There are people that work on these units of 20 days. The long count is, and we'll see an example in a minute, is in fact a very difficult calculation. Goes on with the Mayas, and it was a way for them to go back in the past using both the 260-day calendar and the 365-day combined, and they would make calculation going back to thousands of years. Again, as I say, very often to legitimize the ruler. This is where I'm going to stop. Go on the net if you want to know more about the calendars. Here is an example that was found on the Mojaja stela, where you can see all kinds of glyphs all around. But then here on the side, this is the symbols that correspond to the long count. And so you have bars and a number of little circles on top are all numbers, and very large numbers, often thousands of years, as I say. So the Olmecs have had a great influence, and what we call the Olmecs frontier is in fact different locations and cities that were extremely influenced by the Olmecs, but that were not just next to them. And one good example is Teotihuacan, a city that existed between 1400 and 500. and shows a lot of similarities with the Olmecs. And so we see that zone of influence, if you want, of the Olmecs. Here is a design of a monument that has been found. Unfortunately, if you see the reality, it's almost you can't imagine what it really is. But on the drawing, you can see monuments, and these monoliths would have been set at the corners of these different monuments. And you can see again the face of the jaguar. Now, Koshipala, there are questions. Were they influenced by the Olmecs? Are they cultures that preceded, in a sense, the more abstracted representation by the Olmecs? Is difficult, but they are absolutely delightful little figures. The Koshipala figurines are very famous, very lively, very instantaneous in the representation on both. You have the female here that is identified as a ball player. Actually, it looks like in some instances women were playing the ball game too. Beautiful artifacts. This is a carved bowl of travertine, also reminiscent of some of the Olmec's works. As you can see, delightful engraving. And then cave paintings. This is west of, it's about 500 kilometers west of the Olmec heartland, but definitely influenced by their drawings. And here you can see definitely a ruler with a bow in his hand, and it's looking down at a small figure that could be a prisoner. This is in the, and I have difficulty pronouncing, but Teotihuacan cave. Same cave, the red jaguar here, and then another representation of the feather serpent. And then finally in Monte Alto, another kind that is about contemporary with what we found in San Lorenzo and La Venta, of these giant stonehead. And this is in Guatemala. Slightly different features, as you can see, longer nose and almost slanted eyes. It looks very Asian to me. Moving quickly to Teotihuacan, this is the next culture that we want to talk about. Teotihuacan, very close to Mexico, was a huge city and very international city. It's not one particular culture, but in fact, a mixture of cultures of different cities around that often joined Teotihuacan because it was getting rich, and you had money there, so they could go. They had themselves suffered from earthquakes, from volcano eruption and so on, and then they would move to Teotihuacan, which ended reaching its peak in around 450 AD, so of our era, CE, and probably housed a population of about 150,000 people. It was the largest city ever in Mesoamerica, pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, and one of the most populated cities in the world at that time. This is the way it looked in 1878, painted by Jose Maria Velasco. And this is a plan that gives you an idea of how it was distributed. So the large pyramid of the sun, pyramid of the moon, the temple of Quetzalcoatl, and the great compound. So this was a big ceremonial center. And then all along the Alley of the Dead are different constructions there that were the houses of the elite. And then here, two more of the buildings. So we're going to go through it very quickly. the ceremonial center of Teotihuacan. So you can see seen from the Pyramid of the Moon, and there is the Pyramid of the Sun. And a very large pyramid, 260 feet in height, and a very large base of 720 by 760 feet. The difference between the pyramid, the Egyptian pyramid, this is a square base. You have the staircase, pretty reasonable at first, except for the last flight where they get much higher and very shallow, so make it difficult to go up. They were not supposed to be climbed on. Typically, the shaman or the rulers would appear at the very top, but the population wasn't supposed to go on top of it. Sorry, I'm going to go back there. So I wanted to show you first here. This is a reconstruction of the way Teotihuacan would look. So you have different buildings. This is the Alley of the Death. But then you had the whole series of neighborhoods all around that were split between skills very often, but a whole series of houses, many of them multi-stories buildings. Pyramid of the Moon, slightly less high, 140 feet. It mimics actually the contour of the mountain that is behind. And this was a center of ritual sacrifice of animals and humans. There were a lot of burial grounds have been found around with victims. The pyramid is dedicated to the great goddess of Teotihuacan, who is the goddess of water, fertility, and the earth, and creation itself. Here is an image of the great goddess that was found at the base of the Pyramid of the Moon. The great goddess is going to go on in being worshipped all the way to the Aztecs. Her name is Teotihuacan. And here is the mural of the Palace of Tetitla. This is another of the buildings around, as you can see, very colorful compared to what you can see it now. And these were rituals again, where you would do offerings. In that past, where I found some mural with the great goddess of Teotihuacan. You can see her here represented enthroned with the face, the big headdress, and showing also different images of animals around that are part of the underworld. You have the jaguar, the owl, and the spider, who are considered creatures of darkness and that are found around her. Now separated from it and below it is this design that shows the population that are just going around talking to one another. You see these scrolls coming out of their mouths and climbing on top of the mountain and then being swimming in the river down here. So all could be probably the afterlife realm of Tlaloc. Tlaloc, who is the son, who is the sibling and the husband of the great goddess. So it is in that place. And then Itepantitla, no, sorry, that's the other one here. Another mule that was found with the feather serpent again and flowering tree. Now, in the Ciudadela is really the ceremonial center of Teotihuacan is the famous temple of Quetzalcoatl. Beautiful temple with built in a different way as the others, as you can see, with the technique of talud tablero, which means you have these kind of stages, huge steps with the side being slightly slanted and then decorated with the images of the serpent. Now, the idea of the serpent is going to be widespread around Mesoamerica. So I showed you before the stela of La Venta with the earliest known representation of the feather serpent in Mesoamerica. Here is in Cochicalco, another representation of the feather serpent. He is the deity that comes from actually the Nahua language that means Quetzalcoatl means feathered serpent. Is also known as Cocolca or Gutumas in Maya. He is part of a triad of agricultural deity. The goddess of the cave that we saw before, the great goddess that symbolizes the motherhood and reproduction and life. Tlaloc, her husband / sibling, is the god of rain, lightning, and thunder. And then the feather serpent is the god of vegetation renewal. He is also connected to the planet Venus because the Venus was a very important planet that was connected to the season and the beginning of the raining season. Here is other images of the Quetzalcoatl. Also, what we find in Mesoamerica is the idea of the bloodletting ritual. And for us, it might be very strange, but for them, the whole idea of bloodletting was that offering of the blood, which was one of the most precious things you could offer. Bloodletting was your own blood that you were offering to the god. The blood would be collected in a cup and then would be burned, and the fumes of the burned blood would then go to the gods and be appreciated as a gift. So here you can see, for example, the queen in front of the king, and she is actually making a hole in her tongue and then receiving the blood in the cup that he's holding, and this is going to go to the gods. Here is one of these spoons that would be, you have the perforator there, and then when it would be perforated, you would collect the blood in the cup. Here is another view. This is the very known lintel of the temple in Yaxchixtlan of the Lady Hawk vision. And you see the lady here who is also doing some bloodletting. And from her offering comes out the feather serpent. And from the mouth of the serpent comes the warrior who she was calling for. And of course, all the glyphs around. So quite a normal ritual in that culture and in the culture that comes. Very important other culture that develops a little later than the Olmecs and across the land of Mexico is the Zapotecs. So we're gonna know the culture between 500 BCE and 700 CE, typically around Monte Alban and Mitla. Mitla will succeed Monte Alban when it ends up declining. So the Mitla would be with the Mixtec in between 800 and 1521 CE. These civilizations, these cultures will never be extinct before the arrival of the Spaniards. So they will never be mother culture to others, contrary to all the others. Very quickly, an extraordinary site, this artificial hill, if you want, or plateau, was built by the Zapotecs. And then this was again the ceremonial center, multiple pyramids and other buildings, that one where they would have sacrificed, and then around it, a series of tombs. A very important bureaucratic structure. And when they collapsed, we have no idea exactly why. So here's a map giving you the multiplicity of monuments that were on that location. Here's a ball court, one of the many ball court in that location where they would have their favorite game, a very difficult game. We'll see a little example if we have time, showing how they play it. Done with the rubber balls originally from the Olmecs. And then unfortunately, sometimes the games would end up with human sacrifice for the losers. Not always, only sometimes. As you can see here, a description of the ball game where you can't touch the ball neither with your hand nor your feet, nor the head. It's mostly shoulders and hips. And here's an example of the rubber ball, very heavy. They vary in size. And this was at the time a handstone that they could hold, and that could be used then to throw the ball, to reflect the ball. I'm going to show you very briefly an example of what they call the Yactepec. And try to... Try to move it to you. The whole idea is to make it go through this. Okay, so he got it. This is the whole idea. You have to keep the ball on your side and then have it gone through that circle. As I mentioned, sometimes the ball players, the losers, would be sacrificed. This is an example of the ball player who is sacrificed after the game. And you can question sometimes why was that culture, were these cultures so bloody? There were a lot of bloody ritual, because the blood and the life was the most precious thing that they could offer to the gods. And when they wanted to build a new pyramid or do something important, they needed to have the gods on their side, and the offering was there. So these are some elements of the tombs that were found in Monte Alban. So extraordinary low relief of the person that is in the tomb, and then beautiful jewelry and feathered shields decorated with feathers. Another tomb, the 104, shows you it was decorated with frescoes, and then different beautiful sculptures and terracotta, and then the remains of the body at the back, some other reliefs there. So quite an advanced culture. Also, they developed another system of writing. As you can see, the Zapotecs developed one type of glyphs, the Mixtecs later on another series of glyphs. And this is one of the codices that was made by the Mixtecs. As you can see, they are folded pages with all the glyphs, and these have by now been deciphered. It is in the British Museum. And it goes back all the way to Spain. The Spaniards brought it to Europe, and then it was. So we end up now with the Mayans. And the Mayans that we know of, they had a lot of controversy when the Mayan culture starts. Some people put it 2000 BCE. The sure date is 400 BCE to 1521 when the Spaniards arrived. I've circled here some of the locations that we're going to visit very rapidly, as always. As you can see, the different regions. You have the highlands with all the mountains in Guatemala and southwest Yucatan. But then here you have the plains, and so this is the low country. And of course, things are going to be much easier to build in this part of the country than in the mountains, though we find a lot of sites at the edge here of Guatemala and all the way in the upper right. The Mayan influence is going to go from here all the way to Honduras and San Salvador. So talk briefly about the Mayan religion. One of the better source we have for knowing the Mayan religion is the Popol Vuh, which was a sacred book written at the time of the arrival of the Spaniards that was then translated into Spanish. And it talks about, it's separated in three chapters: the creation of the earth and the first inhabitants, the story of the hero twins, and the founding of the Quiche dynasty. So really important book for us. The religion was mostly led by shaman called the Chilan, and who often used hallucinogens for oracles. There was a really important part of the religion that was the worship of deceased ancestors. It was a patrilineal lineage. And then we have ritual based on astronomical observations, calendrical cycles, very important, history and mythology. The priest would perform bloodletting, incense burning, music, ritual dance, and on certain occasions, human sacrifice, mostly towards the end of the Mayan period. The gods are very different, and they're going to have different names in different cities. The Mayas were made, territory was made of city-states. And so each city is going to have special gods that protects them, as always. The same thing was in Greece before. The main god, Itzamna, creator god, embodied the cosmos, also the sun god. God of maize, the moon goddess, and the Powhatuns, who were 4 figures that were holding the sky from collapsing on the earth. The glyphs, here are the glyphs. And these is in stucco, so they reproduce some glyphs here in Palenque in Mexico, or some glyphs on the Dresden Codex. There were many codices that still exist. There are 3 main of them: the Madrid Codex, the Dresden Codex, and the Paris Codex, each in that location, as you can imagine. And that these were saved, in a sense, from the missionaries who burned all the writings that they could encounter to try to annihilate the old civilization. So quickly, a few sites. This is one of the most recently discovered sites in San Bartolo. It's at the upper east corner of Guatemala, and was discovered in 2006 by pure accident. I give you the link on how to listen to the discovery. It's absolutely superb, narrated by William Saturno, who was the person who discovered, who is one of the best speakers I ever heard. This is an idea of the murals that were found there. Really very interesting iconography with the god of the creation, who goes from one sacred tree to the other, always doing some bloodletting, and bloodletting was done from the tongue, the ears, or for men from the genitalia. And so you can see him going from one to the other. There's in these also the creation, the birth of God of Maize, his ruling, and then he's decapitated to come back to life the next year. Absolutely amazing story. And I'll give you here is these 4 trees that are part of the Powhatan that we told before, with the sacred birds on top, and every time a sacrifice. He is the real fresco. As you can see, very detailed, beautiful headdress for the god. And he is recognizable because of the black patch on his cheek. So the very big importance of San Bartolo. Up to now, the first frescoes that were found with the Mayas were dated between 600 and 800 of our era. When these were discovered, certainly these are dated 100 BCE. So these are the very first frescoes that have been discovered belonging to the Mayas. Also part of that site, some tombs, as you can see, all decorated, all frescoed all around the tomb of these rulers. No book written on it. I assume it is part of the problem of intellectual property. One of the oldest sites, Maya site besides San Bartolo, is El Mirador. And El Mirador, I can't show you much because there's not much to be seen, but it's one of the highest pyramids that was made in Yucatan. The Danta pyramid is 259 feet high, 2,800,000 cubic meters. This is the way it appears, so completely lost in the vegetation of the Yucatan, the tropical forest. This is the way El Mirador would have looked, with a huge ceremonial center, as you can see, not a tree in view. And that's often the wrong idea we have, that these cities were overwhelmed by vegetation. No, the Mayas took down everything that existed as vegetation. They were an agriculture society. And unfortunately, that was their demise. They abused the land, and the population grew so much, they were unable to sustain after 900, unable to sustain. So there were revolts, there were fights between the city-states. And finally, the regime changed from a unique ruler to councils, and slowly the civilization went down to nothing. Tikal in Guatemala is one of the most beautiful sites, about 6.2 square miles with 3,000 structure. This was the source for jade and obsidian and cocoa for the rest of the Mesoamerica. Just enormous features, pyramid. The Mayan were constructing pyramids over pyramids. So when one ruler had died, often the next big ruler would build another pyramid on top of the pyramid. So they have that story of having multiple layered pyramids too. So during that period, 400 to 900, Tikal dominated much of the Maya region politically, economically, and militarily. This was, by the way, connected by causeways because the terrain was rather marshlands, and so so they could go from one place to the other. Here is one aspect of Tikal, the temple one, and then you can see numerous stelae that were in front of each of the buildings, and these were dedication stelae of rulers that lived during that period of time and were responsible for the construction of these buildings. This is one of the stelae showing one of the Hawa, one of the rulers, one of the kings. And you can see an incredible amount of symbols all around. Beautiful headdress. In the tomb were jadeids, ceramics, and this is, for example, one vessel that had on top the portrait of the ruler. Palenque is another of these sites with different temples. This is the temple of inscription with, as you can see on top, kind of a room that was the temple itself where they would have sacrifice. And they used to have these type of stucco low relief of different warriors. A plan to give you an idea of the different structures in Palenque, also one of these very large centers. The Temple of Inscriptions had begun probably about 675 of this era and was the funerary monument to the king Pakal. The tomb was found in the temple, and you can see it going down stairway to the tomb with a sarcophagus where his body was found and a beautiful plaque on top, all engraved with different glyphs. A beautiful representation. And here is the portrait of Pakal the Great from his tomb, and the jade mask that was found on his face and the jewelry that he was decorated with. He was one of the most important ruler of the location. Here is the palace in Palenque. So very beautiful and large building. It was in the center of the city and used for bureaucratic functions, entertainment, and ritualistic ceremonies. This is more or less the idea of how it would work. A pyramid, and this is to give you an idea how it was found. So the condition it was when it was found, and this is the way it looks now, the Temple of the Cross, named because they thought to see an image of a cross there, but it was actually one of the sacred trees. Bonampak is another site, and the pyramid is nothing particular, but what is really important in Bonampak were some of the most beautiful fresco found. But this, keep in mind, dates 800 of our era. So there is 900 years between the frescoes I showed you in San Bartolo and these. This is the team from Yale that is working on these. Unfortunately, as soon as they were excavated, they started fading. So there is now a reproduction of these frescoes at Yale University. And look at the marvelous turquoise colors and very rich coloring of it. And this is the way it would have looked originally. Chichen Itza, one of the later sites, also very large ceremonial center. This is after the decline of the Mayan in 900. Chichen Itza took over, but changed their way of being administered. It was not a ruler anymore, but a council, because the problem with a ruler is that the whole energy of the city ended up being concentrated on the ruler, who lost a little bit track of the they had no vision on the future for the city. And as I mentioned, with a large population, the resources, the soil resources got abused, and they were unable to feed the people. So Chichen Itza, this is the pyramid, El Castillo, as it was found in 1892. This is the way it is now, with the famous figures of the Chacma. These warriors, they were actually prisoners in the sense that were becoming offering tables. So there would be offerings on that flat surface there. These are different names given to these Chacma. Here is the pyramid of the warriors, surrounded by these columns that are in fact each have the figure of a warrior, and then some Chacmas there too. These would have supported a roof all around that has disappeared since. The famous cenote at Chichen Itza that was connected to that temple, and the rainwater would end up throwing itself in the cenote. These are famous structure all over Yucatan. This one in particular had remnants of prisoners that were found at the bottom, and lots of precious objects. Some of the cenotes are pure crystal clear water. They're the result of the collapse of the roof of caves. And these are some of the murals that were found in the Temple of the Warriors. Uxmal is one of the latest site. I wanted to show it to you because of the Pyramid of the Magician in Uxmal and the Governor Palace, that are very different, with that soft and rounded base. It's one of the latest sites in Yucatan. So very quickly, because I know I run late, we have the Toltecs. Toltecs are going to be a rather large civilization between 800 and 1000. And we find quite an advanced culture there, with great monuments. Here is the Pyramid of Tula, which was much higher originally, but reused for other buildings. And then, of course, the warriors surrounding one of the buildings, this very large structure guarding the place. And incredible vessels with these very strong features of the mask. Cholula is again a quick thing. We'll talk about it a little later. This was the largest pyramid in Mesoamerica that was multi-level, and then has been used as a platform for a 17th century church after the conquest, Nuestra Señora de los Remedios, that was built in 1574-75. This is in Cholula, in the Puebla this, province of Mexico. Here, an idea on how it would have been. This is only what is visible, but the pyramid goes much lower in the ground. And is there, you can see that succession of pyramids built at different times by different rulers. So they would use what existed before because it was a good base and then build on top. Very quickly, the Aztec and Tenochtitlan, of course, the Aztec civilization started in 1325 about, and of course finished in 1521. They were ruling that whole center part of Mexico and had that kind of subsidiary group a little further down at the base, at the border of what is now Guatemala. Tenochtitlan was built actually on an island on the Lake Texcoco. You can see a view. The Lake Texcoco with all the little lakes around was rather marshy in that part, but the Aztecs managed to make this, keep it as pure water with a levee that they built across. So here you have a better view of what was Tenochtitlan, with two other cities, Tlatelolco on top and the other, but this is where Tenochtitlan was. They built causeways and bridges that would link them to the mainland, with wooden bridges that they could remove in case they were threatened. Here is a map of what Lake Texcoco used to be with the Mexico City nowadays. So you can see where there are still a few water points, if we can call them, close to Mexico, but mostly marshy land that's not really water. So this is where the Aztecs built their city. That was a rather large city with a big ceremonial center. In the ceremonial center, you had a large temple that was dedicated to the mother goddess and Tlaloc, the god of rain. There were markets all around. This is the Tlatelolco market on the north of Tenochtitlan, but was very typical to other markets that you could find around the city. And this is now what they are excavating in Mexico. The main center, the Zocato, is where the cathedral is just next to this. They purposely destroyed the pyramids and used the stones actually to build the cathedral. And here are the excavations that are done nowadays, where they found many important sculptures. This is the mother goddess, Coatlicue, the mother of earth, shown here, beheaded. That's part of the whole stories, and the hands were cut too, but you have an idea of the terrible iconography that represents that goddess, with snakes making her skirt, and snakes that are linked around her neck. As you can see, they touch their mouths, and then you have the fangs coming out of their mouths, make it like a tongue hanging at the base. Really important mythology where she's going to be impregnated involuntarily after having 400 and some children. And then her main daughter gets very upset with her and goes to all the siblings and decide they want to kill the mother. At the time she's going to be killed, she gives birth to her son, who is going to defend her and dismember the sister. This is the way it would have been. Most of what you have seen as sculpture would have been polychrome, multicolored. These are the main deities: Coatlicue, she of the serpent skirt, Earth Mother goddess, Huitzilopochtli, the god of war, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and agriculture, and many, many other gods. This is the daughter of the mother goddess. That plaque was discovered at the foot of the pyramid and represents the dismembered body of the daughter after she tried to kill her mother. And here is the plaque that was in Tenochtitlan and is now in the Museum of Archaeology, in Anthropology in Mexico. And here would have been in color. So you can see her face and cut down arms and so on. The famous calendar, Aztec calendar stone. And then some works that were beautiful, made of feathers. It's called feather work, either with small feather that are applied with a kind of glue here for the shield, or the beautiful Aztec feather headdress attributed to Moctezuma II. And these come from the tail and the feathers of the beautiful quetzal bird that inhabits the forest of Yucatan in Guatemala. And just a few artifacts that were also found. This is the Aztec eagle warrior, a polychrome vessel, a necklace. And then a conclusion of the Emperor Moctezuma II that you can see here. In 1517, he received the first news of ships with strange warriors having landed on the Gulf Coast. He dispatched messenger to greet them and find out what was happening. And then he told his subject to keep him informed of what was of any new arrival. In 1519, he was informed of the arrival of the Spanish fleet of Hernán Cortés, who soon marched towards Tlaxcala, where he formed an alliance with the traditional enemies of the Aztecs. On the 8th of November, 1519, Moctezuma received Cortés and his troops and Tlaxcalan allies on the causeway south of Tenochtitlan, and he invited the Spaniards to stay as his guests in Tenochtitlan. When the Aztec troops destroyed the Spanish camp on the Gulf Coast, Cortés ordered Moctezuma to execute the commanders who were responsible for the attacks, and Moctezuma complied. At that time, his compatriots considered him as a traitor, and the rapport between the Spaniards and the Aztecs became really bad. And then I'm going to cut it really short. Massacre of the Great Temple happened. And then Moctezuma was killed during a campaign. We're not sure if it's the Spaniard who killed him or if it's some of the Aztecs who considered him as a traitor, as I mentioned. He was succeeded by a king's men twice because they got killed. And then the Aztecs got absolutely run over by the Spaniards. And this was the end of it. The rest of the country followed by different invasions. I just show you quickly that mural by Diego Rivera of the Pan American Unity in 1940, where he shows his population there on the left that is slowly assimilated by the industrial side of the United States. So on these were good words. I want, for those of you that are still there, and I see many of you are still there, if you have questions, I hope this has not been too overwhelming, but there's so much to say. I gave you a pretty good bibliography, and I have many more. If you want something on the calendars or on the writing or on the religion, I have other titles, but I think the ones I gave you are really comprehensive. Again, as I mentioned, unfortunately, like things on San Bartolo, there's nothing in writing, and I think it's due to the problem of property, intellectual property. But there is a very, very good YouTube of a lecture by William Saturno, who discovered San Bartolo, who is one of the best lecture I've ever heard. And I'll give you the link and go on YouTube and listen to it. You're going to have a ball. So please unmute yourself. I'm going to stop the recording. There we are.